Today, I am going to continue teaching Single Sufficient Virtue by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. I'm beginning on page 25, and I'm starting with the root text by Kalu Rinpoche. Through these instructions, men can become Buddhas along with their quivers. Women will become Buddhas along with their yarn. Leaders or rulers will become Buddhas along with their counsels. Cattle herders will become Buddhas along with their work of herding. Rinpoche's commentary on those lines are that when you recognize your mind's nature, it is like a jewel being placed in your hand, the jewel of Buddhahood. In other texts, there is the phrase Buddha in the palm of your hand. This is referring to the same thing. When you recognize the nature of your mind, you are very, very close to becoming a fully enlightened Buddha. In the next sentence almost, he says, but you need to recognize the value of this recognition. Quote, if you gain this initial recognition, then sustain it and recognize that it is it. It is the single most important thing for you to sustain, for you to practice and maintain commitment to that. Again, Rinpoche has not given specific instructions for recognizing it. He has talked about how important it is. He's described it conceptually, but the actual words by Kalu Rinpoche about it are actually missing in this book. So he is being very careful about what he says in this book. And he has very good reason for this. It is considered very bad to give instructions to people that are unprepared to hear them. It can easily lead to a person going down rather than going up. And also, when a student goes down, this affects the guru. Poor students bring good gurus down. Rinpoche more than once said that he was a little concerned about his students and what their behavior was and how they were practicing and so forth, but that he was willing to take that chance. So with that, you might say disclaimer or warning, maybe that's a better way to put it, is with this warning, it is important to realize that a vague recognition or a conceptual understanding is not enough. We have to, first of all, have this pointed out, the nature of our mind pointed out by a qualified guru. And then if we do recognize it, it has to be nurtured with other activities. So Rinpoche gives a long list of activities that he considers important. Quote, this is on page 28. Going for refuge, generating bodhicitta, cultivating devotion for the gurus and compassion for sentient beings, reciting liturgies or sutras, meditating on deities and reciting mantras, practices for accumulating merit like mandala offering, and purification practices like vajrasattva meditation. All of these are necessary, and it is my opinion that these practices here are really what Rinpoche is encouraging us to do in this entire book, because these are things that we can do. These are practices that many of us have received instructions and empowerments to do. And doing these does lead to recognizing the nature of your mind. Rinpoche once told this story. This was a Lama in Tibet. And I don't know if this Lama was alive when Rinpoche was in Tibet or if it goes back further historically. The Lama would make his students do 40 complete nundros before he would give the student pointing out instructions. And Rinpoche, his commentary on this was, After doing 40 complete nundros, you didn't need pointing out instructions because you would have recognized the nature of your mind. So it's really important to do these other practices that lead up to the recognition of the ultimate nature of your mind. So to talk about them individually, first, going for refuge. Recite the refuge prayer every day to remind yourself that you've taken refuge in the three jewels. And also, of course, avoid taking refuge in worldly things, thinking that everything is going to be all right if you have enough income, if you have the right car, if you've got enough insurance on your property, yourself, and so on and so forth. There are many worldly things we can take refuge in, but it is realizing that ultimately what is important is taking refuge in the three jewels. The second is generating bodhicitta, or awakened mind. And this is the aspiration to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. There are three types of motivation to attain enlightenment. There's the king-like, the boatman-like, and the shepherd-like. The king-like is that you, like a king or a prince preparing to be a king, you train and you train and you gather your resources. And a prince would, you might say, gather even a retinue so that when he became king, the transition would be very smooth. So this kind of motivation is, I will attain enlightenment first, and then I will bring all these people out of samsara. And that is considered fine, that kind of motivation is considered okay. Boatman-like motivation is next. There were many rivers in Tibet that didn't have bridges over them. And if you wanted to get from one side of the river to the other side, there would be a man with a boat there that you could pay that he would take you to the other side. And this motivation is that you are going to go to the other side, but like a boatman, you'll take a few people with you. And that's a better motivation than the king-like motivation. It involves more beings. The shepherd-like motivation is when you have sheep, you don't lead the sheep. They're like herding cats. You have to be behind the sheep and kind of drive them forward. Sheep will go over to the right, and you go over there and you chase them back, herd them back to the rest of the herd, and then one will go to the left, you herd them back, and so on and so forth. You have to be behind the whole herd. And so this motivation is that you're more concerned about other beings and directing them to enlightenment than you are for your own attainment of enlightenment. That is the best motivation, and it is the quickest way to attain the goal. All three are considered acceptable, and all three involve generating bodhicitta, this awakened mind, wanting to attain enlightenment for yourself and for all sentient beings. The next point is meditating on compassion and loving kindness for others. And the simplest way and the most common way to do this is to practice Tonglen, which is taking and sending, and doing the other Lojong practices. In Lojong, there is a group of sayings that you memorize, and then you try to apply them in your daily life. So this is one way to meditate on compassion and loving kindness for others, but contemplating at any time is excellent. The fourth is devotion for the gurus. This means trust, confidence, and opening up to the gurus. There is an element of humility in this, an element of wanting to learn, of feeling that you want to learn, you're hungry to learn, hungry for knowledge, and that the gurus are above you and that they have more wisdom than you, have more insight. My experience has been that these Rinpoches also are clairvoyant. They won't talk about being clairvoyant. Let's just put it this way. Khenpo Kartar Rinpoche let me know he was clairvoyant pretty early on in our relationship. Some of you may have met Barter Tulku Rinpoche, who was here at the Hay River Center probably at least 5 times. And I, at one time, had a fairly close relationship with him. So one day I was working at the prison and I had the day from hell at work. And there was a woman in a wheelchair that had an oxygen tank in it. And I was up at the front gate. She went through security, and then I'm pushing her back to the building that I am in. And when we got to the building, security went crazy because an oxygen tank is considered an explosive device. And I was wheeling in an explosive device into the prison. Suddenly, I was surrounded by uniformed guards, and there was a big commotion. And this was about 3:30. I was relatively new there, and I'm thinking, oh, this is not good. This might be very serious. And so I got off work at 4:30, got in the car, and for an hour and 45 minutes, I said, Karmapa Keno, as I drove home. When I got home, my answering machine, the light was on. I pushed the button and the voice said, Lama Yeshe, this is Barter Tulku Rinpoche. Is everything okay? Maybe it was a coincidence, but I don't think so. The point being is that a good guru knows what is best for you because they have a way of knowing more than you do. They have ways of knowing more about you than you know about yourself. Another quality of a guru, and that is they view their guru in very high regard and trust their guru. In the long life prayer that we used to do for Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, one line of it said something like, he took Gyalwang Karmapa's word to be an order, or as a command. I think that was the word, command, not order, a command. The next here, this is number 5 in this list of things to do, is Nundro practice, which includes going for refuge and arousing bodhicitta. The second practice is Vajrasattva, which is confession and purification. Then comes mandala offering, which is used to accumulate merit. And then the fourth practice is Guru Yoga, which is merging your mind with the Guru's mind. In order to do that, then you need to go for refuge, generate bodhicitta, purify through confession and Vajrasattva, and then accumulate vast amounts of merit through the mandala practice. That's why Guru Yoga is done last. There are other practices that you would do after you complete Nundro. The point being that you still need to engage in these types of practices. It isn't that you complete them and check that box and now you don't have to worry about that. You can just put that in the closet. The next one that he mentions was prayers or sutras, reciting prayers or sutras, and we have plenty of prayers. A common sutra would be the Heart Sutra. We don't regularly do that here, but that would be a common sutra, would be the heart of transcendent knowledge. Then number 7 is doing Vajrayana practices. And every Sunday we do a Vajrayana practice, White Tara, Green Tara, Chenrezi, Amitabha, Medicine Buddha. And then another point is we have to be very careful about our actions of body, speech, and mind. Emptiness doesn't negate karma until you become highly realized. A Buddha is free of karma. They purified all their karma and they do not create new karma. But we are a long ways from being at that point. And so we have to be careful of our actions of body, speech, and mind. Gampopa once said, even if your view is as high as the sky, make sure your behavior is as fine as grains of flour. To go on with Rinpoche's advice, we need to avoid becoming more rigid. We need to avoid becoming worse and worse instead of improving. Quote, the first step in avoiding this is to constantly and honestly scrutinize your own mind and your own behavior. And he brings up the slogan in the Lojong teachings. He translates it this way: of the two witnesses, believe the main one. The main one, of course, being yourself, that you can fool other people. But if you look deeply, you can't fool yourself. You may try to fool yourself, but if you look deeply, you see beyond, you might say, the false front that you present sometimes to other people. Trallag Rinpoche, in his book on Lojong, this is how he translates this. Of the two judges, rely on the principal one. So it's just a slightly different translation of that. So only we know how much we are thinking of benefiting others versus how much we are thinking of benefiting ourselves. On the other hand, we have to be aware of the opinions that others have towards us. The opinions of other people do give us clues to how they perceive us, and this might help us see ourselves more clearly. But the slogan means don't hold the opinions of others higher than your own opinion. And we don't reject the opinions of others when it suits us. We can't get off that way. Oh, well, that's just an opinion somebody else has. And I think this. Trallag Rinpoche, here's a quote of his that I think is very pertinent here. If we can appraise our attitudes as more open, more tolerant, loving, and compassionate towards ourselves and others, we don't have to question the effectiveness of our mind training practice. So look for these qualities when you are judging. Are you more open, more tolerant, loving, compassionate? Rinpoche says, quote, if you find that you are unaffected by externals, that no matter whether things are going well or poorly, you still sincerely go for refuge to the three jewels, and you are still motivated by bodhicitta, then your training is going well. So those two quotes really sum up what to look for, whether you are going up or going down. To sum this up, until we attain Buddhahood, we still need to accumulate merit and we need to accumulate wisdom. To put this in another way, on the Mahayana path, they have the 6 paramitas. And the first 5 paramitas accumulate merit. They are generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, and meditative concentration. We accumulate merit by practicing these. They involve actions of our body, speech, and mind. Now, the 6th paramita is the accumulation of wisdom. As we accumulate merit, it becomes so great. Now, I'm not talking about size or mass because it's not physical, but it becomes so great that it transforms into wisdom automatically. And wisdom is being able to have greater discernment and so forth. There are 2 types of wisdom. There is a sherab, which is learned, but it then transforms into yeshe, which is primordial wisdom. So you have merit transforming into sherab, and then sherab transforming into yeshe. So it's important for us to practice the 5 paramitas and try to practice the 6th paramita, which is accumulation of wisdom, and this will speed our way on to fruition. And no matter what glimpses we have had of the nature of mind and so forth, we still need to integrate all aspects of the path. It isn't that, oh, now I see it, I've got this glimpse, I don't have to do the rest of that. And then he talks about renunciation. He gives 2 stories about renunciation. And one is, he describes it as flash renunciation, and the other is a true, deep desire for freedom. The first story is about a monk who developed this flash renunciation, and he came to Trungpa Rinpoche when he was back at his monastery in Tibet, and he said, I want to renounce my possessions, and he brought with him everything that he had in his room. And a monk back in Tibet at that time wouldn't have had a lot of possessions, I guarantee it. But he brought everything, and he gave it to Trungpa Rinpoche. And Trungpa Rinpoche's attendant then was going to take it and then distribute it to other people, perhaps monks, nuns, or whoever, but distribute it, give it away. And Trungpa Rinpoche said, no, wait, let's keep it here for a while. And then the monk came and he said, well, you know, there was one thing that I gave you that I realized I need. And so Trungpa Rinpoche had his attendant get it and give it to the monk. And over a period of time, the monk came and wanted everything back, one article at a time. And that's flash renunciation. I think in our culture, we would talk about a New Year's resolution, and then February comes around, and what resolution? The other example is the previous Tulku Damsho, the being that was reborn as Tulku Damshu. And his previous life, he was not a Rinpoche. He was not enlightened. He really wasn't even interested much in traveling the path. He was a monk, and he probably viewed being a monk as a secure place to live where you got regular meals and you had a job, and that's all you needed. And this is actually a common approach in Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, it's not like he was an oddball. And there's room for that approach. But he had a sponsor, and his sponsor made him do a 3-year retreat. On the other hand, he wanted to make sure that he could get lots of meat in the 3-year retreat. By the end of the 3-year retreat, he had completely renounced eating meat. He became highly, let's say, enthusiastic, inspired, and so forth by the Dharma. He took it deeply into his heart. And after retreat, he vowed to complete 1,000 nyungne. Rinpoche said that he probably completed 2,000 by the time he died. So the moral is that there is flash renunciation, thinking that you are capable of great renunciation right now, and then finding out that you really aren't. And then there is true renunciation, which is a deep desire for freedom that develops over time. And of course, quote, it is long-term gradual development that is needed, end quote. So we need the wisdom to distinguish between these two types of renunciation and to develop the correct type. We need to have both a sincere desire to become free of samsara and an appreciation that one can only do so through, quote, sustaining recognition of the nature of one's mind, end quote. So if you correctly implement these teachings that Rinpoche gave, you will improve. And we need this long-term view that this is the single best thing you can do for yourself and the single best thing you can do for others. It's easy to get distracted in trivial, mundane activities and think that you have to do this or you have to do that. And meanwhile, you don't practice nearly as much as you could. And as a result, you don't progress very quickly. Rinpoche cautions against avoiding personal ambition in our practice and aspirations. When we become ambitious, we can become jealous, competitive, become arrogant, and be prone to secularism, thinking that my particular type of Tibetan Buddhism is better than this other type, or Tibetan Buddhism is better than Zen Buddhism, and on and on and on. All of this comes because the person doesn't have this intense desire to be free of samsara. Rinpoche says we have to be mindful of our motivation, mindful of our actions. And if you see any of this, that is a clue, you might say it's a red flag that we have work to do. Finally, he says, you can't blame it on others. There's another slogan, which is drive all blame into one. So if we blame ourselves, then we can work with ourselves. It's much more difficult to work with other people and try to change their minds, especially when it's your mind that needs to change. The question is, that very first verse that you read talked about men can be Buddhas along with their quivers. So how is it that this single sufficient virtue, the recognition of one's mind, can be incorporated into your mundane daily activities? What he's referring to is, first of all, you have this recognition of the nature of your mind, and that whatever you're doing, you keep regularly looking at the nature of your mind and experiencing it directly. It's very difficult, needless to say. It's easiest when your mind is still. And here you're looking at the moving mind when it's active. But that is what he's talking about, is if you can incorporate this into your daily activities, men can attain Buddhahood. Women with their yarn, meaning women with their daily routine. Herders can become Buddhas, and kings as they're ruling their country. That is what is meant by that. The question is, when you do Chenrezig practice, for instance, sometimes you feel great compassion for all beings. Is this talking about that, talking about having great compassion for beings when you go through your daily life? Or is it something more than that? The simple answer is that it is something more than that it is more than feeling compassion for beings, feeling great compassion for beings, perhaps even all beings. It is actually being aware of the nature of your mind, which is beyond description and is totally non-conceptual. So how does this single sufficient virtue relate to things that go through your mind? That you can have things go through your mind, you realize it is delusion and it is transformed. It's a bit like that. Again, he doesn't describe this. Remember that. He's not pointing it out. He's just kind of dangling the carrot in front of you. Or maybe it's an apple, or in my case, it would be a dish of ice cream. Maybe it would be a chocolate candy. Anyway, what he is talking about is whether it be a thought, an object of perception, or whatever, that you see the fundamental nature that is no different whether it's a good thought or a bad thought. You see the unity of samsara and nirvana. You see that objects of perception have no essence. It's just an object of perception.